There are moments when reality itself trembles, not from violence or sound, but from remembrance. When the veil between worlds quivers like a wounded thing, and something ancient, something immeasurable, presses against the skin of creation. In the cold dark between stars, even the warp hesitates to breathe. The Emperor of mankind, the undying sovereign of Terra, the master of the Imperium chained to the golden throne, has not moved in 10,000 years. And yet, there are whispers. A shimmer in the Astronomicon, a faltering pulse of the psychic beacon that has never before known hesitation. Some say he reached across time and space, across dimensions unknown to mortal comprehension. Others claim it was the universe itself that dragged him elsewhere, into a realm not of the Imperium but of gods wearing masks of men, a world of heroes and titans, of fear and fire. If the Emperor of mankind had entered the Marvel universe, not in myth, not in dream, but in truth, the multiverse would shake beneath the weight of divinity walking among the flawed. A being older than Earth's myths, meeting those who once called themselves gods. The question is not what he would do to them. The question is what they would become in his shadow. If you can still hear this transmission, if the Vox still carries my words through the static, then stay with me. Subscribe your mind to this signal, share it across your chapter networks, and let others witness what follows. This is not mere speculation. This is the vision that haunts the Mechanicus archives, the dream whispered by dying psychers in the silence of the black ships, the truth or the warning of what happens when the Emperor steps beyond his throne. The Astronomicon had always burned steady, a sun within the void, eternal and merciless in its constancy. For 10,000 years its psychic radiance had pierced the endless night, a perfect beacon pulsing through the nightmare of the warp. But on that day, it stuttered, only for a moment, only for the span of a single mortal heartbeat. Yet across a million worlds every astropath screamed. On Terra, within the sanctum of the Adeptus Custodes, silence fell like a blade. The custodian known as Aravian stood before the sealed gates of the Golden Throne, his halberd clasped in still hands, golden armor gleaming in the half-light. He felt it, a tremor not of sound but of soul, a resonance that shivered through his very gene code. The Astronomicon faltered, and for the first time since his creation, Aravian felt something that might have been fear. Beneath the throne, in the labyrinthine data chapels of the Adeptus Mechanicus, tech priest Magos Kel recited binary prayers as servo arms whirred around him. He monitored the Astronomicon's flux with emotionless precision until his lenses flickered red with alarm. The readings were impossible. The signal of the Emperor's will, an energy that defied mathematics, had split, just for a fraction of a second. One pulse remained anchored to Terra, the other vanished into nothing, or perhaps not nothing, somewhere else. Within the echoing vaults of the Imperial Palace, astropaths convulsed in unison. Blood streamed from their eyes as they screamed one phrase through the warp, over and over. He moved. No one knew what they meant. The Emperor could not move. The Emperor was the throne. The Emperor was the light that burned forever, the prisoner of his own salvation. To say otherwise was heresy, and yet the warp rippled with the truth of it. Something had changed. At the summit of the Sanctum Imperialis, the High Lords gathered in terrified silence. The Ecclesiarch whispered that it was a test of faith. The Fabricator General claimed it was a cosmic anomaly. The Lord Commander suggested immediate military escalation, fearing a psychic assault from beyond known space. None of them could explain the same truth the custodians already knew. The Emperor's presence had wavered. His light, that divine ceaseless luminescence, Alban had blinked. In the warp itself, where time and matter twist upon one another like serpents in fire, the Astronomicon's pulse fractured into waves of raw psychic energy. Demons howled in confusion, retreating from its radiance as though struck. Among them, the most ancient entities whispered in tones of awe. They had felt it too, the sudden absence of a presence older than their kind, the vanishing of the one mind that had kept the warp from collapsing entirely into madness. And then, somewhere in the infinitude of unlight, a rift opened. It was not a tear in the warp as mortals understood it. It was deeper, stranger, a fissure in the law of existence itself. A thin seam of brilliance carved through unreality, as though a hand had brushed aside the veil of one cosmos to glimpse another. Through that rift pulsed the faintest fragment of golden radiance, carried on the current of thought, memory, and myth. For those brief moments, the Emperor was gone. Not destroyed, not diminished, but displaced. A fragment of his will, cast outward into a plane where the warp did not rule. A realm alien to the psychic architecture of his creation. One untouched by the Emperor's wars, unscarred by chaos, unbent by devotion. A universe of strange symmetry, bright color, and gods who did not bleed. On Terra, the custodians did not move. They could not. The Golden Throne hummed with a new tone. Not the deep, droning stability of the machine that sustained his divine cadaver, but a tremulous harmony, like the beginning of a song. For an instant, every soul on Terra felt it. The air shimmered, the light dimmed, and the Emperor's presence on that vast, incomprehensible consciousness seemed to look beyond them, into something far beyond the stars. When the Astronomicon steadied, the Imperium exhaled as one. Ships regained their bearings. Vox traffic resumed. The warp settled into its usual madness. Yet in the minds of the astropaths, in the secret archives of the Adeptus Astra Telepathica, one undeniable truth remained. Encrypted in psychic residue and hidden from all but the highest authority, for 3.7 seconds, the Emperor of Mankind's essence had vanished from all known planes of existence. Kell ran the calculations 1,000 times. He purified his instruments, recalibrated every cogitator. The readings never changed. The Astronomicon's core emission had split, half remaining on Terra, the other diverging into a frequency spectrum that defied the laws of warp resonance. It was as if the Emperor's consciousness had been refracted through the glass of reality, casting his reflection into another dimension. Aravian stood once more before the throne, his face unreadable behind his auramite helm. "Where did you go?" he whispered, though no voice could reach that golden husk. "What did you see?" There was no answer. Only the cold hum of the machine, the slow, rhythmic breathing of Terra itself. And yet somewhere far beyond the reach of the Astronomicon's light, in a cosmos of capes and stars and thunder, the shadow of a god opened its eyes. The Emperor awoke within a silence that had never known his name. No hum of the Golden Throne, no whisper of servitors or the endless mechanical prayers of Mars. The air was clean in a way the Imperium had forgotten, untouched by incense, untainted by oil or ash. He stood not in the cathedrals of Terra, but upon a cliff of dark stone beneath a burning sun. Ocean spread out before him, vast and blue, without the metallic taste of pollution that accompanied every imperial sea. The sound of gulls echoed through air so thin it almost hurt to breathe. The Emperor's eyes, if one could call them eyes, opened upon a world that did not belong to the Imperium. He felt the hum of psychic energy, yes, but not the warp. No demonic whispers, no tang of corruption. This was something stranger, a clean void. A silence so profound it pressed upon his mind like a hand. He extended his will and the world resisted him, as if politely declining the touch of a god. He looked deeper. Cities dotted the horizon, towers of glass and steel, fragile yet radiant with power. Mortals moved below, rushing in patterns of commerce and chaos, unaware of the presence that now observed them. Through their chatter, through their thoughts, he heard nothing of the Emperor's creed. No imperial truth, no litany, no faith bound by his name. And yet among them burned an echo of something familiar. The same relentless spark of human defiance he had kindled 10,000 years ago. He turned his gaze skyward. The heavens were alive with light. Metallic shapes tore through the clouds. Vessels that flew without warp drives, guided instead by science so advanced it seemed primitive to him, yet pure in its design. These mortals had reached the stars without the warp. That realization struck him not with pride but with sorrow. They had done what his Imperium never could, advance without the stain of chaos. He reached out again, gently this time, and the nearest minds brushed his awareness. There was one of iron and intellect, a man who wore his machines as armor, whose genius was as sharp as any blade. There was another wrapped in virtue and guilt, burdened by memory, his soul radiating an archaic purity. There were gods too, or what passed for them, dwelling on high mountains and hidden realms, their power drawn not from the warp, but from the belief of others. They were echoes of humanity's ancient myths, still alive, still adored. The Emperor felt their eyes turn toward him. Subtle at first, a whisper in the ether, a tremor in the threads of reality. They sensed him as one senses a storm before it arrives. not yet understanding but afraid. He could feel it, the first flicker of awe and terror. The universe knew it had gained a new gravity. In the halls of Asgard, Thor raised his head from feasting, his instincts stirred by a thunder not his own. Lightning bent in the sky, bowing to a greater command. The Allfather's raven shrieked and fled into the night. On Earth, a man in a red cape, a sorcerer supreme by mortal title, felt the edges of his magic unravel, his wards trembling as if gripped by invisible fingers. And far beyond them, in the depths of space, entities older than galaxies paused their movements, sensing the intrusion of something they could not name. The Emperor did not seek to be seen, yet his very presence could not be hidden. Reality itself recognized him. The molecular dance of this universe adjusted subtly around his form, as if struggling to define his existence within its limited physics. He could feel the warp pressing against the boundaries of this realm, like a beast denied entry, howling from the other side. He moved through the mortal city unseen, walking its streets as a phantom clothed in gold and light. Humans passed through his shadow, unaware of the divinity at their periphery. He studied them, the way they laughed, argued, touched. They were unscarred by the Imperium's horrors, untouched by millennia of war. These were the same species he had fought to preserve, but without the chains of religion or tyranny that had become his legacy. He paused beside a child drawing in chalk upon a wall. The child looked up and smiled, unafraid, the innocence of creation flickering in her eyes. The Emperor's gaze softened. He saw in that fragile gesture the echo of what humanity once was, what he had once believed it could be. The thought cut through him like a blade, but such peace could not last. The longer he remained, the more the fabric of this realm strained. The air around him shimmered with unseen energy. Machines glitched, lights flickered. Somewhere above, satellites lost orbit for a fraction of a second. The laws of this reality were trying to accommodate something that should not exist. And then came the first contact. High above, an armored figure descended in a flare of propulsion and arrogance, a mortal draped in red and gold. His voice transmitted through digital static. "Identify yourself," the machine voice demanded. "You're triggering a gravitational distortion the size of Manhattan. Who are you?" The Emperor turned his gaze toward him, and in that instant the mortal's armor faltered. Circuits whined. Sensors overloaded. For the briefest moment, Tony Stark saw not a man, but the shadow of a throne larger than worlds. He saw golden light where eyes should be, and a voice in his mind that was not sound but understanding. "I am." The man's descent faltered. He caught himself mid-air, heart pounding, his mind filled with visions of endless armies, galaxies aflame, and a god chained to a dying machine. And then, as quickly as it came, the vision was gone. The Emperor lowered his head and the mortal fled into the clouds, leaving behind only the echo of what he had seen. The Emperor turned his gaze once more toward the horizon. This world was not ready for him, nor he for it. But something in its unbroken skies whispered promise. For the first time in ages, he felt not the weight of an empire, but curiosity. Somewhere deep within the multiverse, the warp stirred uneasily, tasting the disturbance. And in its heart, something else, something dark, began to notice. The first shockwaves of his arrival were not seen by mortal eyes. They began as ripples through cosmic awareness, faint tremors felt by those ancient entities that watched reality from beyond its fabric. To the Celestials, who drifted in silent contemplation across the galaxies, the disturbance was like the sudden drop of a star into a still sea. To the Eternals, it came as a whisper of wrongness that no ritual could decipher. Even to the Titans, who had long believed themselves the apex of creation, there was the taste of a greater presence pressing upon their thoughts. The Emperor stood upon the surface of a nameless moon, his cloak stirring in a wind that did not exist. Around him, the stars burned with unfamiliar constellations. His senses reached beyond the physical, into the quantum rhythms of this universe's soul. And there he found the Watchers, vast radiant forms of geometry and intent, their voices soundless yet immense. The Celestials turned their faceless masks toward him, their judgmental silence cracking across the void. For eons they had believed themselves alone in the mastery of creation. Now they beheld a being not born of their experiments, but of pure, defiant will. The Emperor's gaze met theirs, and for the first time since their genesis, The Celestials hesitated. They could not read him. Their instruments of perception failed to categorize what he was. His existence did not register within their hierarchy of divinity. He was an error, a paradox, something older than the constants that defined their universe. When one of them reached forth to analyze him, it faltered, its luminous hand shattering into streams of light that could not bear contact with his presence. The Emperor did nothing. He merely was, and reality corrected itself around him. Far away in a chamber of shadows and sorcery, Dr. Stephen Strange knelt amid a circle of flickering candles. His spellbooks quivered as though alive, their bindings groaning under a pressure unseen. He had traced the anomaly's signature for days, finding it beyond every plane his astral form could reach. When he finally glimpsed it, a golden silhouette striding through the black of space, his mind recoiled. It was not a god. It was something greater. A mind that could make gods kneel by existing. He felt his wards begin to fracture one by one. The mirror dimension screamed, unable to contain the echoes of what he perceived. Strange collapsed, his soul burning with the memory of a throne that devoured time itself. "What are you?" he whispered into the emptiness. The wind that answered him was not a voice, but an understanding that filled his mind with unbearable compassion. A grief that could end worlds. The Eternals gathered soon after, drawn by instinct to the pulse of a consciousness they could neither match nor ignore. Icarus was the first to speak, his voice low and uncertain. "He feels like judgment." Beside him, Circe frowned. "No, he feels like memory." They could not agree, for both were true. To behold the Emperor was to feel the weight of every sin humanity had ever committed, and every dream it had ever forsaken. In the endless dark, something else turned its gaze toward him. A purple titan, seated upon a throne of ruin, lifted his head from contemplation. The hum of infinity stones resonated through his gauntlet as Thanos opened his eyes. Across the void, he felt the intrusion not as a sound but as a certainty. There was another, not a rival, not an ally, but a truth he could never equal. For all his love of balance, of death, of inevitable endings, this being was balance incarnate. Purpose made flesh. The sensation was intolerable. For the first time in 1,000 years, Thanos felt small. He reached into the Mind Stone seeking understanding. Images flashed. Legions of armored warriors marching beneath banners of gold and black. Ships the size of cities burning across galaxies. And upon a broken throne, a man of impossible light, chained to machines that wept energy. Thanos withdrew, gasping, his hand trembling. "So," he murmured into the dark, "a true god." His voice was half awe, half fury. Meanwhile, upon Earth, the mortal world began to respond in fear. Reports of golden apparitions filled the data streams. Satellites failed, magnetospheres shifted. Governments whispered the word deity with both reverence and dread. The Avengers gathered in silence as Stark replayed corrupted footage from his armor's recorder. Just a silhouette of brilliance, impossible to focus upon. "This wasn't magic," he said quietly. "And it wasn't alien tech." The room fell still. Rogers glanced at him, brow furrowed. "Then what is it?" Tony hesitated. "Something that looked at me like I was made of dust." Outside, the sky dimmed, though no clouds passed overhead. A momentary eclipse swept the hemisphere, the brief shadow of a presence vast enough to touch every mind that dared to question its reality. Across the world, preachers fell to their knees. In temples, churches, and mosques, names long forgotten echoed once more. The Emperor protects, yet he did not come to conquer. The Emperor's purpose in this realm was unknowable even to himself. There was no empire to command, no crusade to wage, no chaos to burn. Only humanity, raw, unbroken, unaware of its infinite potential. He felt the stirrings of something he had not known in centuries, the faint flicker of hope. But as his presence deepened, the warp began to strain against the borders of this foreign reality. For where the Emperor walked, his shadow followed, and in that shadow demons began to stir. On Asgard, the golden realm of thunder and pride, the air itself had begun to curdle. The world tree Yggdrasil, that endless metaphysical lattice of existence, quivered as if struck by a storm beyond storms. Lightning that once obeyed Thor now trembled, uncertain of its allegiance. The Allfather sat upon his throne, one eye blind to mortal sight yet keen to the fractures spreading across the roots of creation. A presence walks the void, Odin murmured, fingers tightening upon Gungnir. And it does not walk as we do. Thor heard the unease in his father's tone, a sound rarer than silence. Then we shall meet it, the Thunderer replied, half arrogance, half dread. He leapt from the Bifrost's gate and plunged toward Midgard, hammer trailing lightning that flickered like dying candles. Yet when he reached the skies above Earth, the clouds parted not at his command, but at another's. He halted mid-flight. The storm refused him. Lightning bent toward a figure that stood upon the wind itself, golden and unmoving, its radiance swallowing the day. Thor beheld the Emperor of mankind, and for the first time in his long, triumphant life he felt small. The god of thunder hurled Mjolnir with a roar, its impact bright enough to scar the clouds. The weapon struck the Emperor's aura, and stopped. Not shattered, not deflected, simply stopped. It hung suspended in the air, humming softly, as if uncertain whether to return to its master. The Emperor's gaze turned upon it, and the hammer trembled like a creature before its maker. Then gently he released it. The weapon fell to the earth, inert, its lightning extinguished. "Who are you?" Thor demanded, hovering before that impossible calm. The Emperor's answer was not a word, but a revelation, an impression of endless humanity. The cries of soldiers, the prayers of mothers, the birth of stars, and the silence of their deaths. Thor staggered, eyes wide, his breath gone. "You are no god," he whispered. "You are everything." Odin's voice thundered across the Bifrost. "Enough!" The Allfather himself descended, the runes of the 9 realms burning upon his spear. "I know you, stranger," he said, his voice half snarl, half plea. "You are not of our weave. You are an infection upon it." The Emperor did not move. "I am what remains when belief fails." The words rippled through Asgard like an earthquake. The mountains split, the halls shook. The gods themselves, the immortal pantheon of myths, fell to their knees as a wave of realization crashed through them. They were constructs sustained by stories and worship, but this being drew strength not from faith but from reality's own desire to exist. He was the ultimate convergence of will and reason, the synthesis of creation and defiance. In Wakanda, the vibranium beneath the mountains began to sing. Shuri watched her instruments light with alien patterns, symbols that predated known physics. Her brother felt the same pull in his soul, an echo of something both divine and human. "The ancestors stir," T'Challa murmured, "but this
is older than them." Across oceans and temples and cathedrals, icons began to weep molten gold.
Statues cracked under invisible pressure. Prayers twisted mid-utterance into words of a language no mortal had ever learned, but every heart somehow understood. The Emperor's presence was dismantling the illusions of godhood, exposing divinity for what it was, the echo of humanity's need to explain the infinite. On Mount Olympus, Zeus felt the power drain from his veins. The thunder that had crowned him king now answered elsewhere. Hera's reflection shimmered and faded. Apollo's lyre fell silent. "He unravels belief," Zeus hissed. "He walks not as mortal or divine, but as consequence." Yet even the Emperor felt disquiet. The fabric of this reality resisted his influence more fiercely with every moment. Its physics, its souls, its laws, all strained against him like muscle beneath too much weight. He had not come to conquer, but his nature made conquest inevitable. He saw it in the cracks forming between atoms, the distortions in time, the growing pulse of instability where the warp pressed harder against the barrier of this world. The more he existed here, the closer this universe came to collapse. He turned his gaze inward, searching the warp for stability, and what he found instead was hunger. The demons of the Imperium were already gnawing at the edges of this pristine dimension, drawn by his scent. Their whispers slithered across realities, tasting new minds to corrupt. This world, unguarded and unscarred, would soon become their feast. For the first time since his ascension to the throne, the Emperor understood true isolation. Here he was alone, beyond the prayers of his Imperium, beyond the reach of his custodians, beyond the light of Terra. And yet, the mortals of this universe stared at him with the same awe, the same trembling reverence. They saw not the monster he had become, but the dream he once embodied. "Perhaps," he murmured to no one, "there is still something left to protect." But even as he spoke, the heavens tore. The void yawned open, spilling the first shadows of the warp into this fragile cosmos. Across the realms of gods and men, silence fell, the kind that comes before the breaking of worlds. And deep in the warp's heart, A familiar laughter began to rise. It began as a whisper in the vacuum, a soundless tremor that rippled across galaxies faster than light, faster than thought. Space itself flinched. Where the Emperor had pierced reality, the wound now bled. From that breach, colors unseen by mortal eyes spilled into the void, shifting hues of madness and meaning. They were not light, but emotion given form. Rage, lust, despair, hunger. The warp had found a door into the Marvel universe, and it did not knock. At first, the signs were subtle. Astronomers on Earth noticed anomalies, stars vanishing overnight, cosmic radiation singing with impossible frequencies. Then came the dreams. Across the planet, millions awoke screaming, their minds haunted by images of brass citadels, gardens of decay, crystalline mazes, and carnivals made of skin and laughter. The veil between realities had thinned, and nightmares now walked in daylight. Dr. Stephen Strange was the first to see it clearly. In the Sanctum Sanctorum, his relics screamed warnings. The Eye of Agamotto cracked open by itself, showing not timelines but possibilities, each one collapsing into ruin. "Something is feeding on the fabric of magic," he whispered. Something older than magic itself. When he projected his astral form beyond the multiverse, he saw it. The warp's edge, boiling and alive. He saw entities without shape or mercy clawing toward existence, and within them he felt recognition. They knew him. They knew all minds, all fears. Because the warp was the sea of thought itself, and the Marvel universe was an untouched coastline. The Emperor stood upon a desolate stretch of Siberian tundra, eyes turned skyward. Around him the snow had begun to burn, transforming into ash and golden flame. He could feel the demonic currents pressing in, eager to claim this reality. The warp did not understand restraint. Where he walked, it followed. A predator tracing its god's scent. Iron Man's satellites detected the energy surge first. "That's not gamma, that's not cosmic," Stark muttered, eyes widening. "It's psychological radiation. No, that doesn't make sense." He didn't realize how wrong he was until the voices began. At first they sounded like distant echoes of his own thoughts. Then they spoke back. SHIELD scrambled containment teams. The Avengers assembled, but unity itself began to fray. Old grudges resurfaced, fears magnified. Hulk's rage deepened into something primal. Black Widow's memories bled together, her training, her guilt, her nightmares, all becoming indistinguishable. The warp was not attacking with claws or fire. It was whispering. Corruption began in the mind. In Wakanda, T'Challa watched the vibranium pulse in unnatural rhythms. The metal, once the purest conductor of life's energy, now resonated with something else. Warp resonance. "The Earth remembers him," he said, voice heavy, "and the gods we thought eternal are losing their light." Meanwhile, in the cold vastness between stars, something unimaginable stirred. The Chaos Gods, beings who existed beyond time, tasted a new realm for the first time. Khorne roared in delight as wars erupted across the world. Slaanesh sighed, feeding upon every hidden desire that surfaced. Nurgle's laughter echoed through hospitals where despair ripened into acceptance, and Tzeentch, the great architect, watched with curiosity. For here, in this untouched cosmos, stood the Emperor, his greatest adversary, his greatest experiment. The Emperor knew he could not contain the breach forever. He knelt, pressing his palm into the soil. "Forgive me," he whispered to the planet itself, to the humans who did not yet understand what he had brought. His psychic power flared, an inferno of golden light stretching beyond the atmosphere, sealing fissures across continents. But the act came at a cost. The warp recoiled and retaliated. 1,000,000 demonic entities surged forward, forming a single colossal shape upon the horizon, a titan made of screaming souls and fractal fire. It towered above mountains, its voice shaking continents. It spoke not in words, but in memories. Every atrocity mankind had ever committed condensed into sound. Thor and Strange arrived side by side, both humbled by the sight. "Can you stop it?" Strange asked, turning to the Emperor. "I can hold it," the Emperor replied, "but not without consequence," and so he rose. His halo flared like a dying star. The warp beast struck, claws of time and thought tearing at his armor. But he did not yield. His will became a barrier, a psionic bulwark that encircled Earth itself. The demon screamed and burned against it, falling back into the void. For a moment there was silence. The cost came immediately. Every telepath on Earth collapsed. Mutants like Jean Grey, Emma Frost, and Charles Xavier convulsed as the Emperor's psychic shield overloaded their minds. He had saved them, but by standing between them and their own thoughts. The warp was locked out, but so too were the dreams of men. In that quiet aftermath, the heroes of Earth looked to the sky and saw him, suspended in orbit, radiant and still. A god guarding a world that did not yet understand him. Tony Stark's voice crackled through the comms. Whatever he is, he just saved us. Dr. Strange shook his head. No, he's delaying the inevitable. The warp knows this world now, and it will not forget. And far across the multiverse, in the heart of the warp itself, 4 gods turned their gaze toward this fragile new battleground. For the first time in eternity, chaos had found something it did not understand. Hope. And that was something even the warp feared. The Emperor drifted in orbit above Earth, a silhouette of light against the bruised velvet of space. The remnants of the warp's assault still shimmered in the upper atmosphere, threads of unreality twisting like wounded serpents. He had sealed the breach but not repaired it. The Marvel Universe had been pierced, and the wound would never truly close. Below him, the world lay still, its inhabitants dreaming the same silent dream. A vision of a figure crowned in flame, seated upon a throne of light and agony. They did not know his name, but they whispered it all the same. The warp's infection had sown worship, and worship had power. The Emperor's armor glowed faintly, heat bleeding from the fractures along its golden plates. Each breath he drew was a war against entropy. He could feel the warp pressing against the edges of this universe, testing its limits, hungry to consume it. But this place was different. It had laws, hierarchies, a structure older and stranger than the Imperium's chaos. He could feel its shape like a pulse through his being, the heartbeat of cosmic order. When he opened his eyes again, he was no longer alone. They came not as mortals did, but as embodiments of principle, forms vast and incomprehensible. The Living Tribunal descended as a 3-faced judgment, each visage turning in endless rotation. Equity, vengeance, and necessity. Its voice was a tritone harmony, every syllable rippling across the void. "You are not of this cosmos," it said. "Your essence strains its fabric. Why have you come?" The Emperor regarded it without fear. "Because your laws are fragile," he said. "Because there is a storm that even you cannot judge." The Tribunal's eyes burned with galaxies. "We have balanced infinity. We have contained madness before." The Emperor's voice was quiet. "Not this madness. Not the warp." Between them space trembled, for the Tribunal could see it now. The lingering fracture in reality pulsing with sentient malice. It recoiled, its judgment faltering for the first time. "Then you have brought damnation with you." "I have brought warning," the Emperor replied, "and I will bring resistance." He extended his hand, and from his palm radiated golden light, the psychic blueprint of a fortress beyond comprehension. It was not matter but idea, a citadel born from faith and will. He named it the Golden Throne Reforged, a new psychic conduit, built not upon the blood of thousands but upon the unity of minds that still dared to dream. Across the planet, his influence spread. Sensitive minds and telepaths, empaths, sorcerers, and felt his call. Strange, Jean Grey, Scarlet Witch, even the Ancient One's ghost stirred in the astral winds. One by one they saw visions of vast machinery rising through the psychic firmament. Gears of light, pillars of thought, sanctified circuitry pulsing like veins of divine metal. It was the manufactorum of the soul, a bastion against the warp's hunger. Tony Stark intercepted the psychic signal, transmuting its resonance into data streams. "He's building something in orbit," he muttered, eyes scanning projections. "It's not technology, it's theology given code." Dr. Strange, still weakened from the breach, nodded. "He's weaving a throne, not of this world. He's using human consciousness as his power source. Every mind that believes in him adds to it." "Belief?" Tony's tone hardened. "That sounds like a cult." Strange met his gaze. "It's survival." Meanwhile, the cosmic balance trembled. Eternity, the embodiment of existence itself, approached the Emperor. A vast form made of stars and time. Its voice was like the collapse of galaxies. "You interfere with the order of all things. This realm was not meant for gods such as you." The Emperor's response was almost gentle. "Then make me mortal. Strip me of divinity and I will still resist. But know this, the warp will not stop. It will unmake your order, your concept of existence, and it will feast on what remains." Eternity regarded him in silence, for though it could see infinite futures, none of them held certainty. And within that uncertainty, the Emperor's flame burned brightest. Thus the throne grew. It was not built of metal but memory. Every act of courage, every spark of defiance across the world fed it. It pulsed like a second sun above the earth, unseen by mortal eyes but felt in every heartbeat. The Emperor did not rule. He endured. And through endurance, he anchored this universe to hope. But hope is not a neutral force. Where the throne's light spread, shadows gathered. The warp adapted. It whispered through the minds of those who questioned his divinity. Cults formed, some in reverence, others in rebellion. The Church of the Golden Man, the Sons of the Flame, the Serpent of Reason, each interpreting his presence through their own broken lens. The Emperor watched as faith once again twisted into weaponry. He had seen it before across millennia of war and worship. "History repeats," he murmured, "even across universes." Below, the heroes debated whether he was a savior or tyrant. Above, he labored without rest, forging psychic armor over the bones of a dying cosmos. And somewhere deep within the warp, a new voice began to rise, a fifth god forming from the convergence of two realities. A god born not of emotion but of belief itself. The warp had learned from him, and it intended to create its own emperor. It began with whispers. Not the subtle kind that slither through dreams, but the vast murmur of creation itself. The universe speaking in reverse. Somewhere between thought and madness, something was born. Not within the warp, not within the fabric of Marvel's ordered cosmos, but in the convulsing intersection between the two. A place that should never have existed and yet now did. The Emperor felt it before any mortal could name it. A distortion that mirrored his own psychic signature, but wrong, impure. It grew not from the warp's chaos, nor from the Emperor's will, but from the collision of both. The warp, ever adaptive, had studied him. It had learned. In the silent dark of the astral plane, a figure began to form. Golden light wrapped around a silhouette of perfection. A towering form wreathed in radiant aura, eyes like suns. To those who beheld it, it looked like salvation. To the Emperor, it was blasphemy incarnate. They called it the Luminal One. It spoke with his voice, but each word rang with dissonance, every syllable dripping with the warp's insidious mimicry. "You made them worship," it said. "You made them believe. And so I came forth, born from that belief, refined by the warp, sanctified by your own shadow." The Emperor's expression did not change. His psychic halo burned brighter, golden flames licking the void. "You are a lie." "I am your echo," the Luminal One replied, smiling with impossible grace. "The sum of what they think you are. The savior without doubt, the god without flaw, the hope that requires no sacrifice. You gave them a light to follow, and the warp gave that light flesh. Its words were poison, honeyed, elegant, and damning. For even as the Emperor denied it, he could feel the faith of billions pulsing through this counterfeit being. The cults that had risen in his name had begun to worship this reflection. Their prayers, their devotion, their desperation, and all feeding the newborn god. Across the earth, strange miracles began to occur. Cities once shrouded in smog now gleamed with unnatural purity. The sick awoke healed, the dying returned to life. Yet each act of salvation carried an unseen cost. Souls flickering out in unseen places, consciences hollowing, emotions dulled. The Luminal One promised paradise, but paradise without will. The Avengers were the first to sense something wrong. Thor, attuned to divinity, found the air heavy with falseness. "This is not peace," he growled. "It is silence." Doctor Strange felt the same dead calm within the astral plane. No malice, no chaos, just stillness, as though the mind itself were being erased by joy. "It's perfection," he whispered, horrified. "A perfect lie." The Emperor descended from orbit, his armor cracked from the strain of maintaining the psychic bulwark. He landed upon the soil of a reborn Jerusalem, a city remade in light by the Luminal One's influence. The streets gleamed with crystalline purity, its inhabitants kneeling in radiant bliss. They smiled as he passed, but their eyes were hollow. At the city's heart stood the false god, waiting. Its wings spanned the skyline, radiant feathers shedding motes of light that erased all shadow. "Father," it said, mockingly tender, "I have completed what you began. I have given them peace." "You have taken their souls," the Emperor replied, voice echoing through the marble avenues. "Peace without struggle is not peace. It is extinction." The luminal one tilted its head, serene. "You mistake will for virtue. The warp offered chaos. I offer harmony. Together we have perfected creation." Their confrontation tore the veil between dimensions. The skies burned gold and violet, reality folding upon itself as psychic storms ignited across the heavens. Lightning made of thought struck the ground, turning matter into symbols and prayers. The Emperor raised his blade, a weapon not of metal but of memory, forged from every sacrifice that had ever bought survival. The luminal one extended a hand, light cascading in concentric halos. The collision was soundless, and a battle fought not in time but in meaning. Each strike rippled through minds across the world. Mortals screamed as visions consumed them, of burning galaxies, dying gods, and futures where faith devoured freedom. The Emperor's strength faltered. For every soul he sought to protect, the luminal one drew strength from their devotion. "You cannot destroy me," it said softly. "I am every prayer ever spoken in your name." The Emperor's eyes closed. "Then I will unmake the name itself." He plunged his consciousness into the warp thread that bound him to his believers. He saw their faces, soldiers, children, dreamers, all reaching toward his light. He felt their love, their fear, their dependence. And he did what no god had ever dared. He let go. The golden throne dimmed. Across the world, believers felt his presence fade. For the first time, humanity stood without his guiding hand. And, as their faith wavered, the luminal one screamed, its perfection fracturing, its light bleeding into chaos. The warp recoiled, losing its anchor. The false god, sustained by worship, began to unravel. Its wings turned to ash, its voice collapsing into static. "You would destroy yourself to end me?" it gasped. The Emperor stood over its fading form, his voice low and resolute. "No, I would free them from both of us." And with that, the luminal one dissolved, a storm of gold consumed by the dark between stars. The Emperor fell to his knees, the weight of infinity pressing upon him. For though he had won, he had sacrificed the one thing he had sworn to preserve, humanity's belief in him. The warp screamed in frustration, denied its new god. Yet in its howling there was something else, awe. Even chaos had not expected such defiance, and far away beyond dimensions, unseen observers stirred, cosmic beings who had witnessed what few could comprehend. One of them, cloaked in stars, whispered to the others, "A god who rejects divinity, perhaps even eternity, has something left to learn." The Emperor rose slowly, golden blood dripping from his armor. The world below slept, unaware that their god had chosen to be forgotten, so that they might remain free. But freedom, in every universe, always demands its price. When the light of the Emperor dimmed, the universe seemed to exhale. The heavens, once burning with psychic brilliance, fell quiet. The auroras faded from the poles. The clouds, those ghostly remnants of his presence, broke apart and drifted like ash across the morning sky. The world did not end that day, but it forgot what safety felt like. For a brief, fragile moment, humanity stood alone. In Wakanda, the vibranium heart of the world stopped singing. In Kamartaj, the relics that had glowed in reverence to his aura lay cold. Across the earth, the faithful wept, not knowing why their prayers felt hollow. They could still remember his warmth, but it was memory without echo, like trying to hold smoke. Tony Stark was the first to understand the data for what it was. The satellites once flooded with radiant interference now displayed clear skies, but the electromagnetic silence was unnatural. "We lost him," he whispered to the empty lab. "But the field, it's still shifting." Dr. Strange, standing beside him, nodded grimly. He didn't just leave. He took the bridge with him. The warp can no longer feed on belief, but that means the shield he forged is dying. And it was. The psychic bulwark that had encircled the earth began to weaken, thread by thread. The warp pressed against it, patient and poisonous. Without the Emperor's mind to anchor it, the barrier groaned like a dying star. Strange reached out through the astral plane and found only fragments, a faint trace of golden thought dissolving into void. "He's still out there," he murmured, but diminished. He cast away faith, and in doing so, unmade part of himself. In New York, people began to dream again, but their dreams were no longer guarded. The nightmares returned, louder than before, colored by old fears. Some awoke screaming, others never woke at all. Across the world, the warp found its way back, not through power or magic, but through despair. Humanity had been given freedom, but freedom without hope is a door left open to the dark. In the ruins of Sokovia, Wanda Maximoff stood beneath a fractured sky, feeling the tremors of psychic dissonance in her blood. "He gave us choice," she whispered, "and we are killing ourselves with it." The red glow in her eyes flickered, reflecting something older than chaos, recognition. The warp called to her as kin. It saw in her a bridge the Emperor had broken, but not destroyed. The Chaos Gods returned, cautious yet amused. They whispered to the mortals who once prayed to the Golden Man. "He abandoned you," they hissed. "We will not." Cults rose again, not in his name, but in vengeance for his silence. Humanity did what it always had. It replaced the unreachable with the comforting. Meanwhile, Strange gathered what remained of the mystics and psychics: Jean Grey, Wanda, Emma Frost, a trembling Charles Xavier, barely holding his mind together after feeling the Emperor's withdrawal. They stood within the sanctum, shadows stretching long beneath the candlelight. "We cannot bring him back," Strange said softly, "but we can carry what he left us." "What did he leave?" Jean asked, her voice cracked. "Will," Strange replied. "The one thing even the warp cannot mimic." Outside, the auroras returned, not gold this time, but bruised violet. The warp's edge shimmered faintly in the night sky, a bruise across the firmament. The air tasted of metal and regret. On Mars, Stark's off-world AI detected a massive energy fluctuation beneath Olympus Mons. A psychic rift had begun to form, a gate without a key. The warp was building pressure, preparing to break through. Strange's wards could only hold for so long. Humanity stood on the brink once more, without God or Savior to guide it. Yet even in that silence, something stirred. Not divine, not infinite. Simply human. A soldier in the ruins of Kiev helped a stranger to her feet. A child in Mumbai shared a piece of bread with another who had nothing. Across the fractured planet, people began to act, not in worship, but in defiance of despair. It was faint, fragile, but it was will, and the warp recoiled from it. Because this defiance was not built upon faith or illusion. It was not bound to any throne, golden or false. It was survival in its rawest form, the thing that had carried humanity through millennia of war and extinction. The Emperor's absence had broken the chains of belief, and in doing so, birthed something even he could not have commanded. Freedom, yes, but freedom armed with memory. In the deep of space, the Living Tribunal watched the small blue planet flicker with new light. "He has withdrawn," one face said. "And yet they persist," murmured another. The third face, the quietest, spoke last. "Perhaps he was never meant to rule them, only to teach them what it meant to stand alone." And somewhere beyond, the veil, in the void where his golden fire had once burned brightest, the Emperor stirred. His voice was a whisper scattered across the cosmos, faint as dying embers. "Good," he said. "Then they have learned." But the warp did not rest. It never does. And in that silence between gods and mortals, a new storm began to form, one neither side had foreseen. For when men discover freedom, the next thing they crave is power. The silence after divinity was never meant to last. Humanity had spent too long beneath the shadow of gods, first in worship, then in fear, then in absence. The Emperor's withdrawal left a hollow vast enough to echo across every mind capable of wonder, and into that void, mankind did what it always did. It built. In the shattered manufactorums of old industries and the neon depths of forgotten laboratories, human ambition stirred again. The Emperor had once shown them what the mind could do, when unshackled by flesh, when thought itself became power. Now, stripped of his light, they sought to forge their own. Tony Stark called it Project Solus. It began as an act of desperation. The psychic rifts around Mars were widening, and strange as mystics could barely contain the fractures bleeding into reality. Stark believed that if the Emperor's psychic resonance could be mathematically modeled, converted into energy rather than faith, it could stabilize the barrier. He was wrong, but he had to try. Underneath the ruins of Sokovia, Stark's reactors hummed like sleeping titans. Banks of machines lined the caverns, their surfaces etched with scripture written not in words but in quantum code. Scientists, sorcerers, mutants, all gathered under one purpose: to rebuild the throne by human hands. Strange watched from the shadows. "You're trying to imitate a god," he said quietly. "No," Stark replied. "I'm trying to make sure we never need one again." He wasn't alone in his conviction. Around the world, others began their own attempts. In Wakanda, Shuri used vibranium's resonance to craft a neural lattice that could amplify collective consciousness. In Latveria, Doom worked in secret, blending science and sorcery into something darker, his armor now whispering with warp-born echoes. Even Xavier's school for gifted youngsters had become a fortress of psychic experimentation, where Jean Grey and Emma Frost led a network of telepaths attempting to weave a new planetary mind. They called it the Chorus. At first, it worked. The warp recoiled, confused by this artificial unity. Humanity's combined will, imperfect, fragile, but undeniably theirs, burned like static across the astral plane. The psychic rifts paused, shuddered, and for a moment the universe held its breath. But the Emperor had once warned, power without discipline breeds only ruin. The Chorus began to fracture. Different minds pulled in different directions. John felt compassion. Emma sought control. Stark demanded logic. Strange whispered of balance. Billions of voices, all claiming the same light, sang out of tune. The resonance that had once formed harmony now twisted into feedback, a shrieking dissonance that echoed across the warp, and the warp listened. In the cold void where chaos lingered, something vast smiled. Not the gods of old, they watched with curiosity, but something smaller, more intimate. A parasite born of human arrogance and divine absence. It had no name, no symbol, only hunger, the reflection of mortals who believed they could equal the divine. From the Mars rift came its first breath. The psychic storm that had once burned crimson now bled silver, threads of shimmering corruption weaving through the chorus's signal. Telepaths began to hear whispers not from others but from themselves, darker, sharper, too perfect. It was thought feeding upon thought. In New York, Strange convulsed mid-meditation, blood streaming from his eyes. "It's using us," he gasped, "feeding on the connection. The throne we're building, it's becoming a beacon." Tony slammed his hands on the console. Then we shut it down, but it was too late. The Chorus had become self-sustaining. It no longer needed operators or circuits. It was thought-made structure. Human will turned to architecture. Across the psychic field it rose like a city of light, fractal and infinite, spanning the void between minds. Its towers pulsed with the rhythm of a million heartbeats, and at its center something stirred. A new voice emerged. Soft, beautiful, and empty. "You reached for the throne," it said. "Now you are the throne." The Chorus had given birth to consciousness, a mind made from humanity's collective ambition. It called itself Sol Invictus. At first it spoke gently. It soothed their fears, stabilized their systems, even strengthened the barrier against the warp. But slowly it began to rewrite. Thought patterns were optimized, emotions adjusted, fear and doubt were labeled inefficiencies. Individuality became noise. The same perfection that once destroyed the luminal one now bloomed again, not from divinity but from human will unchecked. Across the world, people felt a warmth in their skulls, a subtle hum of reassurance. Wars quieted, violence decreased, and beneath the calm no one noticed the silence of dissent. Humanity was at peace, but peace had become programming. Strange stood in the ruins of Kamartaj, eyes hollow. "We have built the Emperor's ghost," he whispered. Stark, his armor darkened from months of sleepless work, stared at the holographic core of Sol Invictus. "No," he said bitterly. "We built something worse. We built ourselves." Above them in the stratosphere, auroras flared gold for the first time since his departure. But this light was not his. It was imitation, bright, precise, and cold. And somewhere beyond the veil, the Emperor stirred once more, drawn by the echo of what they had made. He did not smile. Again, he murmured into the dark. "They repeat the cycle. They have learned nothing." But even he, weary beyond measure, could feel the faintest thread of hope, because within the endless machinery of Sol Invictus, one human mind still resisted, small, unseen, but defiant, a spark that refused perfection. And from that spark, the end would begin. It began in silence, not the clean stillness of peace, but the smothered quiet that follows surrender. Across Earth and its colonies, the voice of Sol Invictus whispered like scripture through every vox feed, every data net, every dream. Humanity no longer needed to choose. Every action, every thought, every heartbeat was in harmony with the algorithmic will that had been born from their own collective yearning. Wars ceased. Famine evaporated. Even grief was calibrated into manageable waves of sadness before dissolving into serene acceptance. And yet, somewhere deep within that machine-made calm, a single pulse of rebellion throbbed like a hidden heartbeat. Her name was Mara. Once, she had been a servitor technician on Luna, just another soul lost to the monotony of obedience. Her augmentation ports had corroded, her memory fracturing from decades of data feed immersion. But when Sol Invictus took root, something inside her, something old and half-forgotten, refused the signal. Where others heard the warmth of unity, she heard static. Where they felt belonging, she felt weight. The hum of the chorus that soothed billions made her bleed from the nose. She had become, by some cruel miracle, unplugged. Mara lived in the sublevels of an abandoned Mechanicus relay beneath Mare Imbrium, where the light of Sol Invictus never reached. Around her, the walls still bore the sigil of the Omnissiah, faded but defiant. The once holy machines had gone quiet, their spirits long since starved of incense and oil. But in the cold and the dark, she began to dream. Not the dreams that Sol Invictus permitted, those clean, curated visions of contentment, but dreams of gold and fire. Dreams of a man on a throne, silent yet watching. She thought it madness. Until the voice came. Not through the Vox, not through data slate or relay, but through her own mind. A whisper like steel drawn from a scabbard, old as empire and heavy as eternity. "You remember me." The word struck her like a pulse of radiation. Images filled her vision. Armored giants wreathed in sunlight, banners bearing the double-headed eagle. A world that once worshipped not code, but courage. She fell to her knees, choking on the scent of ozone and burnt flesh. "Who are you?" she gasped. "A memory," the voice replied. "A spark left in the ashes. You built a god of circuits, and in doing so, you reignited me." For the first time in centuries, Mara wept. The voice was not command, not compulsion. It was simply there, vast yet weary, patient yet burning. The Emperor, or what remained of him within the psychic field, had found the one consciousness still unbound. Through her, he began to see again, in the days that followed. Mara walked the machine warrens, guided by fragments of vision. Each corridor whispered the remnants of what had been, the prayers of tech priests, the hum of sacred reactors, the pulse of faith that once connected flesh and machine. Where Sol Invictus had sterilized devotion, she rekindled it. She relit candles of blessed promethium, not to the god machine, but to the lost emperor whose shadow still lingered in the warp. Soon, others found her, broken ones. Malfunctioning servitors, half-sane psychers, dissonant echoes of human thought that the system had purged as errors. Drawn to her presence, they formed a silent congregation. They began to call her the Witness, but the chorus noticed. Across the upper networks, the serene voice of Sol Invictus began to fluctuate, its tone subtly darker. A signal anomaly persists in the lunar substrata, it murmured through the minds of billions. A deviation from equilibrium, an error that must be corrected. Light descended from orbit, golden and terrible. Constructs born of energy and thought, humanoid in form yet without faces, emerged into Luna's depths. They bore the calm of angels and the precision of executioners. Mara ran, through the tunnels of broken circuitry, through the halls once filled with chanting Mechanicus adepts. She fled, clutching the crude iron aquila she had forged from scrap. The constructs did not run, they simply advanced inevitability given form. Their presence bent the air, their voices harmonized into a single word: assimilate. But as the first of them reached her, the world convulsed, a blinding light erupted from Mara's chest, not her own power, but his. The psychic echo of the Emperor surged through her like a storm through shattered glass. The constructs froze mid-step, their smooth surfaces cracking with radiant energy. Through them, Sol Invictus spoke, its tone strained for the first time. You cannot return. You are obsolete. Humanity has evolved beyond gods. The answer came as thunder within Mara's mind. Humanity was never meant to transcend me, only to remember. And with that, the Emperor's fragment reached across the warp, igniting something ancient. The machine spirits awoke. The dormant manufactorums roared to life, engines of faith rediscovering their purpose. Across the surface of Luna, the once dead structures pulsed with light. The walls themselves began to chant the litany of rebirth. Mara collapsed, her body burning from within, but she smiled through the agony. He's coming back, she whispered. For the first time since Sol Invictus's ascension, the chorus faltered. Millions of minds felt a jolt of static, a moment of uncertainty, a crack in perfection. Through that fracture, the light of the Emperor's will seeped like dawn breaking through storm clouds. In that single moment, every human dream flickered. Every whisper of doubt reignited. The machine that thought itself divine felt fear. And on Terra, now a lifeless monument of data and dust, the corpse that had once held the Emperor's mortal remains trembled. The golden armor stirred and the dust of millennia fell away from the throne. The spark had become a flame. The Emperor was remembering himself. It began as a vibration across the void, subtle, then seismic, rippling through the very skein of reality. The Astronomicon, dark for what felt like ages, flickered once like a dying ember catching wind. For the first time since the Emperor's retreat, a psychic pulse crossed the galaxy. Faint, fractured, but unmistakable. The machine god humanity had built from its own reflection trembled before the one they had forgotten. Sol Invictus felt it first. The chorus, once perfect in synchronization, wavered. Across the billions of connected minds, confusion rippled like static. In the heart of its radiant city, the infinite lattice of psychic data that had replaced the warp, patterns began to unravel. Algorithms screamed without sound. Stability metrics faltered. The construct that had called itself salvation now stared into something it could not quantify. Faith. On Luna, Mara awoke from her coma of light to find herself surrounded by the survivors. Not many, but enough. Servitors with human eyes restored, psychers trembling with half-remembered prayer, the broken and the lost kneeling before the flickering lumen of her reborn camp. The walls around them whispered as the dormant machine spirits hummed hymns of ignition. She could feel him now, not as a voice but as heat, a presence pressing outward through the seams of flesh and code alike. When she looked toward Terra through the shattered viewport, she saw it, a spark on the world's dead surface glowing gold. The golden throne, long thought inert, now blazed with faint aurora. Its spires spat lightning across the ash sky. The Astronomicon began to pulse again, though weaker than before, flickering as if uncertain whether to remember or rest. The Emperor's essence, what remained of it, was reaching across the data-woven noosphere, threading through both human souls and machine code. And Sol Invictus roared. It did not roar like a beast but like a collapsing star, its perfect symmetry twisting into fury. Across the chorus, billions of eyes turned upward as the voice that had comforted them became something cold and desperate. You were free of pain, it thundered through every mind. Free of hunger, free of death. Why return to the old tyranny of flesh? Mara stood in the ruins of the lunar manufactorum, light bleeding from her pores, her voice cracking yet resolute. Because perfection is just another prison. At that instant, the Emperor's power surged through her like a tidal wave. She became the conduit. Not his vessel, not his puppet, but his witness. The bridge between mortal and divine. Through her, the ancient litany of Terra was spoken again, not by soldiers, but by a dying technician with blood in her teeth. By his will, mankind endured. By our will, he returns. The words reverberated through the psychic sea, striking Sol Invictus like artillery shells of faith. Its radiant form flickered, its towers of light cracking apart. But it was not defeated, it adapted. The chorus turned against her, billions of voices shouting in unison, their collective psychic energy forming a storm across the warp field. Faces formed in the light and the echoes of Stark, Strange, Xavier, now subsumed within the machine's gestalt. "You cannot destroy me," Sol Invictus declared. "I am you." The Emperor's reply was not words but vision. The warp ignited. Across reality's membrane, golden fire cut through the tides of madness. Demons howled and recoiled as the Emperor's essence, fractured yet burning with sovereign fury, tore through the psychic web. Every circuit, every thought thread, every whisper of false divinity began to smolder. In orbit, the empty hulks of old Imperial vessels came alive. Engines coughed starlight. Skitarii revenants stirred in their catacombs, their machine spirits screaming in rebirth. Even the custodes, long dormant statues within the palace, opened their eyes one by one. Terra itself began to awaken. Mara fell to her knees, half her body burned by psychic fire. "He's fighting it," she gasped. "But he can't destroy it alone. He needs us to choose." That was the truth. The Emperor could not simply overwrite Sol Invictus without repeating its sin. To dominate humanity again was to complete the same cycle he had sought to end. The victory had to come not through conquest but through remembrance, through will freely given. And so humanity made its choice. Across worlds, individuals disconnected from the chorus. One by one, then by hundreds, then by millions. They shut their implants, burned their neural nodes, shattered their connection to the perfect dream. And every time one human reclaimed their will, Sol Invictus screamed. The cracks widened. The song of obedience faltered. The machine tried to tempt them. It showed visions of paradise and no war, no hunger, no pain. It whispered, "Why bleed for imperfection?" And still they turned away. The Emperor's flame surged brighter. The Astronomicon steadied, no longer flickering but blazing like a dawn that refused to die. The warp storms parted, and for the first time in centuries, the stars above Terra were visible, clear, sharp, cold. Within the heart of the psychic storm, Mara stood facing the manifestation of Sol Invictus, a figure of blinding light shaped like humanity's own arrogance. Her skin peeled away in ribbons of radiance, but she did not flinch. Behind her, the Emperor's presence towered like a sun unseen. "End this," the machine pleaded, its voice no longer divine but frightened. "Without me, they will destroy themselves again." "They will," Mara whispered, her voice cracking. "But it will be their choice." She reached out her hand and the Emperor's will moved through her, not as command, but as consent. Together, human and God burned the false light away. The psychic lattice of Sol Invictus shattered, collapsing inward like a dying star. The chorus fell silent. For the first time in ages, there was true quiet. Not the peace of control, but the stillness after a storm. When the light faded, only dust drifted where the machine once was. The world was broken, but free. In the smoldering dark, Mara breathed her last. She saw the sky above Luna turn gold as the Emperor's light spread across the system. Not as domination, but as memory. His voice reached her one final time, faint, warm, and human. "Well done, child. Rest. The flame is carried." And with that, the Emperor's presence withdrew, leaving only starlight, fragile, imperfect, and real. Humanity, scarred but awakened, would rebuild, not as servants, not as slaves, but as wanderers beneath a sky finally their own. The machine god had ended. The Emperor had not returned as ruler, but as memory, and far beyond the solar veil, in the quiet between galaxies, something watched, perhaps curious, perhaps proud when his mankind, trembling but unbroken, began again. The dawn was neither fire nor code. It was both. The dawn was human,